after these conversations where people said to me, no, but it's not really your sort of music, is it? When I then started to look for these players, the more I looked, the more I found the well of talent runs deep. We're just not coming out. Now we're out.
So do you consider yourself to be a role model, and do you think it's important for people to be seeing someone like you doing what you're doing?
You do become seen as a sort of a go-to figure or a representative of the BAME corner, if you want to call it that.
I suppose with time and with age, I've come to accept that I might be. Again, you know, you can only be a role model if you're seen, if you're heard. When I come across or when I meet young music students from a range of backgrounds, but of course, especially those who come from backgrounds that have Caribbean heritage or different types of heritage, they find it interesting to know how my music has fitted in. I mean, I especially find it actually is very useful in the Caribbean, because a lot of young music students now, they think that for them to succeed as composers or as musicians, they have to be just like Mozart. So they're always surprised when they hear what my music is like, and they go, God, we never knew that it was possible for us to write music like that. You could actually be a composer and sound like that. That's revolutionary for them.
If that duty has sort of been bestowed on you, you have to do your duty to sort of give back and represent for the sake of younger generations. I think there need to be role models, as I said, and there need to be people that they can turn to, or even championing the sort of work that is being done to make sure that it's being people are talking about it, people are, you know, making sure that enough effort is being made, that there are opportunities for people from poorer backgrounds, from backgrounds that can't afford, you know, top class music education. What are the ways in for their kids? What are the ways in for kids that grew up on an estate where there is no music school, where you don't get music lessons at school? So for me, I think it's important to shine a light and champion those aspects.
Have you ever felt the sort of the burden of representation?
Not really, because maybe it's just such a permanent thing that you're always representing. When you go in the room, you're representing. So it's like, it's part of the experience. By now, it's almost second nature. Working in classical music, you represent every time. You go in the space, you come out of the space, you do the music, you don't do the music. It's part of your job description, basically.
I don't mind it, because I came from a background, I mean, I grew up in an estate where there was no sort of, you know, classical music wasn't a thing that you did in a block of towers. In that sense, I don't mind sort of giving back and trying to make it easier for the next generation as much as I can do. I mean, I can only do as much as people ask me to, but at the same time, it's a good feeling to think that hopefully there might be someone out there somewhere that has sort of seen the work, or gone to a concert that I've done, or gone to a talk, or looked me up on the internet or whatever, and thought, oh, okay, maybe I can do something similar to that. So it's definitely rewarding in that sense.
I think I'm ambivalent with that, because there's only so much you can do. Within the space of one creative opportunity, there is only so much scope for doing something that is demonstrative of making use of being the role model. And sometimes that speaks to a certain group of people and they feel you've achieved that. And by the same token, there are others who don't feel you've achieved what ought to have been achieved. So it's a vexed question, really, I think.
Well, I think it's important. You have to talk about it. If it's not being spoken about, then who are those people going to turn to talk to? They need a perspective as well. So if they're not talking to you, are they going to talk to people that don't have a background in that realm or in that, you know? It's a tricky situation because yes, it can become a bit annoying. You're like the go-to person to talk about all issues to do with diversity and race and the lack of it. But if you're that person that's working in that field and you're one of 3 people, then the odds are that you're going to be asked quite a number of times.
Have you ever felt sort of pressured to either sort of defend or explain, let's say, classical music's diversity deficit?
The deficit of diversity in classical music? That's not my problem. No. I don't have to explain that. That's the people that have the orchestras can explain that. But in my knock orchestra, there's quite a lot of black people. So I don't have an explanation, really. They're all from Nigeria, what can I say?
When I had this light bulb and I looked around me and realised this terrible deficit of minorities missing from the orchestras around me, I realised that I had a job to do. And that job did not only involve finding all these musicians. I could count on the fingers of one hand how many musicians of colour I'd ever worked with in the UK, and 3 of them were opera singers. So you can't exactly make an orchestra with 3 opera singers and 2 viola players, one who'd moved to Miami and one who was living up in Edinburgh. So I went underground and found all these musicians. I had to speak to all of them individually and find out about their standard of playing, what their experience was, what their feeling was about where they stood in the industry. And many of them were just struggling to get by. And yet they're playing at these incredible levels. What's going on here?
I think I do have questions given the demographies of certain cities, towns in the UK, where in some cases, in some places, there are majorities in the population, and you think, well, why isn't their music represented when somebody creates a programme for a resident orchestra? Leicester is one such place where there is a great diversity of people and a great excuse for having a greater diversity in concert programming. And I think the outcomes, if someone could take the risk, could well outplay the risk, in the sense that there'd be so much to be gained in that so many people would want to access what was being offered, because people connect with what they can find levels of relevance with, don't they?
There's an implication from the outside that because you're black or because you come from a culture that's other than Europe, people aren't going to understand your language, or people aren't going to be interested. And the short and quick answer is yes, they are going to be interested. It's music. It touches people. Play it for them. Let them respond. You know, instead of always asking us to arrive armed with an audience so that they know they're not going to lose their money.
I think there are challenges in the sense that you have to be true to yourself and not be steered into a corner where you have to play to a stereotype. It's also about using the opportunity to actually enable people to have a new perspective that takes them by surprise as to the type of creative opportunity and outcome that can be achieved, so that they come back to those kinds of opportunities and creative circumstances with an open-minded perspective that gives people a chance to feel that they've really got a clean slate in which to find a space to be creative.
I'd like to think that once people get to know me, it sort of breaks the ice, and people's preconceptions or ideas that they might have, you know, I don't look like a composer, or, you know, my head's shaved, I'm wearing a baseball hat, I'm wearing trainers, whatever, I'm wearing a hoodie, you know, what they might think, oh, okay, he's fine. So in that sense, as I was going back to the idea of being classed as a BAME composer or a black composer, you do represent, inadvertently, you do represent a whole bunch of musicians or composers. That's how people, for whatever reason, see you. So it's good to be there as a sort of a flag bearer and show people that, you know, you can create great work, you can deliver and be a good musician, composer, whatever you may be. So I think, again, it's the more experience that those people that you're interacting with have with people from different backgrounds, people of who are black, who might be Asian or whatever. It's good for them as well to, you know, it's like trying a new food. People think that it might be too spicy or it might have too much flavour, but you know, at the end of the day, they might look at it and think, this is bloody brilliant.
I always think about a history teacher who talked about the first time he tasted a banana. And for us in the class, we just couldn't imagine it. Couldn't imagine a world so limited in culinary opportunity, you know? And I suppose you have to take the risk to try something, to know, actually, I'm going to try this and keep on eating it, and then try something else that is in that world of fruit. And it's a bit like the classical music world. You can have a diet of certain works in the repertoire, and after a period of time, if you look closely, you'll begin to ask questions about who is actually sampling that fare. Have they all stayed at the same age? Have they grown older? Are there any younger people coming to listen? What is the diverse mix of those in the audience? Does anybody think about the audience?
Moving on to the orchestras and the classical music world in general, I mean, the Chineke orchestra, a black orchestra of black musicians. Why do we need that? Because there must be a problem. So it's actually a sign that there was a problem, because if there wasn't a problem, there would be no need for it. So they would have been visible anyway in an audience, so they would be like, oh yeah, we're everywhere, so we don't need to do that. And, you know, as I said, we had our orchestra in the 90s, where we had players from, you know, we had predominantly young black players that we were working with at that time. And it was the same thing, and it was representation, but representing ourselves. But the difference was we were coming as composers, and we were really about the repertoire and getting players that could understand where we were coming from to play our music. So we had brass players from, say, the jazz players, string players, etc., etc. But this issue's been a long one, and I think it really comes down to you have to do the thing yourself one way or another. So in the case of Chineke, Chi-chi's got on with her own thing and set it up and got on with it and represented something in a certain way. And for composers, like I said, I'm working in Nigeria, I have my own ensembles, I write the music, I do it. So you're not reliant on other people kind of giving you those diverse opportunities, but you're actually just getting on with what you do.
So I was putting together this orchestra that I knew was going to be impactful. It was going to change perceptions of all those people who think classical music looks like this and is played by people like that. And the music we play are all these dead white, usually males, composers, which I've played most of my career. The music I've played has been written by men, white men, who died 200 or 300 years ago. I'm not saying it's bad music. I've played fantastic music, but why do I only play this dead white man's music all the time? What else is out there? I knew that in order to get systematic change, you have to change perceptions. So my new orchestra was going to do this. The minute we walked onto the stage, people were going to be like that, and then we were going to play off the scale, because that is key. We've got to, it's got to be great. At the same time, I realised, so we're going to create a pathway by this professional orchestra. So who is the pipeline? So I created a junior orchestra at the same time, the Chineke Junior Orchestra, aged from 11 upwards. They are the pipeline. The Chineke professionals mentor the juniors. So these children, who are also from all over the United Kingdom, no two kids knew each other like the professionals, no two players knew each other. We didn't have a network of support. We were always waiting to be told what we could and what we couldn't do, and always being controlled and by white people. We are not used to seeing people of colour in authoritative positions in the classical music industry.
So what do you think the world of classical music is doing that impedes the participation of black people in the UK from engaging in it?
I think it's simply that they're not listening. They're not open to the fact that everybody who participates in this music is there because they love it. It's like, when you choose a classical music path, like anybody goes into intense sports training or ballet, actually. We have all started from a very young age. We've got to where we are, having started very early with the training, with the dedication, with the hours. Surely that should count for something. And therefore, it's simply that it should be counted on the same basis that everyone else is taken in.
Why we even decided we were going to come in to the world as composers is because we realised the problem was not black players. There were black players back then, lots of them, Everton, Nelson and all those players from that period. There were lots of them, even then. That's in the mid-90s. The issue was not the players, the issues were the repertoire, that we were not represented in the repertoire. The nearest representation we had was Porgy and Bess Gershwin. If you think about it, it's like when all the black singers come out every time they do Porgy and Bess. That's when they're all busy doing Porgy and Bess when it's that season. So that's representation, and then suddenly that piece is out, and then it's to do with the repertoire. So that's why it was important that there were composers creating new repertoire, which automatically ensures new representation, because the pieces that I do, even Cycle of Reckoning, the one I just did with the thing, is like, okay, we need a percussionist. This percussionist must come from an African tradition or a tabla player. I don't mind, but it has to be someone from traditional music, either India or Africa or something from those backgrounds. So automatically the orchestra in that piece is now more diverse because the piece demands it. So it's those things, And then all the other pieces that I've done, almost all of them include, whether it's jazz singers like Cleveland Watkins and whoever, all these other singers that I have in the piece, it does it naturally. If the composer, knows what they're doing, it will happen organically. I don't have to go, oh, we need a diverse group this time. I don't have to think that, because I just do the music and it creates the new cast that's needed. So I think that's the key. That's the key. So composers are the key, really.
One of the things that I think gets in the way is something called unconscious bias, where people are very comfortable with surrounding themselves by people that look like themselves. Everybody suffers in some way from unconscious bias. And because, I spent all those years in an industry where white was the norm, white was the status quo, but I'm thinking, but why should it be? I've been a bit angry at myself that I've not asked myself or looked into doing anything about that question until 3-4 years ago. And to be honest, I don't know if the world would have been ready for Chineke 4 years ago or beyond 4 years ago. I think when it happened, it was exactly the right time when people were ready to see a change. Because I'm observing more and more orchestras competing for smaller and smaller, shrinking, dying off audiences. And all these orchestras are obsessed with audience development because they're not getting... And I'm thinking, if they're carrying on playing the same... if you're carrying on doing the same thing, you're going to get the same result, aren't you? And so Chineke has, with one concert, our first appearance on the stage, completely changed the audience. The audience, for the first time in my entire career, looked like London. It looks like the community that I live in. And that's why I'm so utterly committed to the work that we're doing, because it's not right to go on like this.
The audience that you attract also reflects the musicians, the composers that are telling those stories. So if you're sort of streamlining yourself in a very particular way that is cutting away those audience streams, then yeah, you're definitely gonna, moving forward, you're cutting off your options, you're sort of spiting yourself. And I think especially in very multicultural cities, towns, countries, it's very important that the full sort of spectrum of tales, whether you're from a country that's been affected by war, or if you've come from a culture where classical music isn't the sort of go-to music, we need to represent, otherwise things become very niche and they die out, I think.
I think the figures are something like 15% of our population in the UK identifies as non-white. Yet when you get to the cities, that figure goes up to about 50% of people who identify as non-white. The cities, which, the crucibles of where our cultural centres reside, opera houses, concert halls, theatres, you name it. Yet we have 1.7% of black and minority ethnic musicians in these orchestras. 1.7%. It's shameful.
There was an argument going around that why is there sort of positive discrimination to BAME musicians?
Yeah.
But I think it's been such a long time that I don't want to say that people have been neglected, but it's almost like a light hasn't been shone on that talent and that sort of pipeline of encouraging people. That there isn't that framework, I don't think, of where people where young composers, artists, musicians can turn to find that support, to find role models. So in that sense, it's a great benefit for younger generations and for future generations, I think, to turn to that, to have it as a reference point. So I can see where the argument comes from, but I think it is a necessary thing to to do to sort of address issues within the classical music field. And definitely there's still a lot more work to do.
You know, we do not have a scheme in the United Kingdom where musicians are specifically trained for winning jobs in orchestras. And so if the orchestras truly mean it when they say to me, when I talk to their chief executives, for example, and they say, look, Chi-chi, well, I mean, the one that annoys me the most is, well, it is a meritocracy. You know, they've got to be of a certain... That's the first thing that people say. And it's as though they're assuming that because someone's, they're not in the orchestra, it's because they're not good enough. And I say, look, can we stop using that as an excuse? Because diversity is not mediocrity. Please don't put those two words in the same sentence anymore. Remove that from your vocabulary. Diversity should be business as usual, and try to look at us and people of colour as an absolute equal and something that you should be aspiring towards spending more time with, actually.
Do you think that there's a future for young black composers or performers in classical music in the UK, and what does that future look like?
I hope there's a future for that. I mean, I think so. I think our story is one that's not been told, and most of the other stories have. So actually it's a fresh story. It brings new ideas, it brings a freshness.
I think there is a future. I think the future could be one where because they're grounded and born in a country and have a heritage in a country, there could be a perspective that helps them to deal with their identity as British subjects, as well as looking at the lineage that has been handed down to them through the archives associated with the cultural backgrounds that they come from.
The only way that we can change these perceptions and this attempted dumbing down of the skills of a classical musician is by, we've just got to get out there and just keep getting out there and keep doing good. That's the only thing we can do. We've now, one of my Chineke juniors, Sheku, 6 months after we started, he was the principal cellist of the Chineke juniors. And he also played with the professional orchestra. Look what happened. See what we're capable of? 6 months after our first concert, he won BBC Young Musician of the Year. What his parents said to me when I was ringing up all the parents of children across the country, they're from Nottingham. They said to me, we've got such musically talented children who go to junior academy. The oldest ones were going to academy and junior academy. They feel as if they're in a vacuum. They're brilliant, but they're in a vacuum. Chineke has given them all a focus. And I think that's the important thing. Now that our young ones have got this focus, we're going to see some things happening now. Sheku wins BBC Young Musician, making history for us. The first black child to win that competition. It's the biggest music competition that's on our screens. It's been going for 40 years. It happens every 2 years. This year was the next competition after Sheku's win. No fewer than 5 Chineke juniors reached category finals. How about that? And we're talking only 20-something kids get to category finals across all the instruments. 5 of them were Chineke.
What is nice now is that there's more of a lineage, and in the sense that support networks are being created through organisations such as Sound and Music, Chineke Orchestra. It's not just at a certain level where you can gain help or have an opportunity. That it's junior level, it's intermediate, going through to sort of professional level, emerging, etc., etc. It's support doesn't just sort of stop at a certain stage. It has to be seen through to the very end, and I think that's what's lacked in the past.
I think it's a great opportunity to experiment and to find new ground for the work they will create. I think that what interests us today and what interests them in their particular lifespan would be quite fascinating to review and follow as different generations are exposed to new things. Technology is taking us into different places.
It's a confidence thing, thinking, hang on, I do want to be in this industry, I can do it, I'm being represented, I've got the support of all those professional Chineke people, and I've already got one of the juniors who's won it, and it's about visualization, seeing each other. Just seeing each other gives us all that extra bit of confidence. And I think that's what I was saying earlier about, I think we're going to see things changing in the next 5 years or so. It's not going to happen overnight. And in some ways, it's almost easier for Chineke to make these radical changes, to create an orchestra that looks like the community we live in. It's easier for us in a way than an orchestra many of our orchestras have been running for more than 100 years. It's much harder to change an organisation like that overnight. They have to work at it. And we're there to help them. And we also know that, the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and this year the London Symphony Orchestra, led by Simon Rattle, they've all now created, the LSO have just announced the LSO Academy of the East, i.e. Hackney, Tower Hamlets. The London Philharmonic have created a junior thing for diversity. We know that we've impacted all these orchestras. They have to do this now. They're looking at themselves thinking, oh my God, they're scared of their whiteness now because they know they need to change it. And until Chineke shone this bright light on the issue and on the huge talent that we have, after these conversations where people said to me, no, but it's not really your sort of music, is it? When I then started to look for these players, the more I looked, the more I found the well of talent runs deep. We're just not coming out. Now we're out. And these big organisations are having to look at us now, and they're creating their own pockets, so that they're showing willing now, and that's because of what we've done. And I'm so proud of this. I can't tell you. And that is an indication to me that they are wanting to find ways to change.
But it's I think it's an interesting narrative that you were just saying there, because you are placing the burden of responsibility on them.
That's exactly what they have to do. They've seen us now. They can't now say that we don't exist, or that classical music is not for people like us. They can't say that anymore. And this is what I'm saying about the issue about racism is their issue that has a negative effect on us. So they've got to start addressing that, and that's what they're beginning to try and do.